Hi everybody, my name's Crystal Moon and I'm here with Liana Buchanan, who's our Commissioner for Children and Young People in Victoria. How are you going, Liana?
Yeah, I'm good, Crystal.
That's good. We're just here today to talk a little bit about what the Commission does and the upcoming inquiry. So Liana, tell me, what does the Commission for Children and Young People actually do?
So really we're here to promote children's rights and children's safety. So we do a whole load of different things. Part of what we do is we oversee services to children. So we try and see how government and other services are working with children and young people and monitor that and try and make suggestions for how that can improve. We also have a role to advocate for children and young people to try and make sure that their interests are being taken into account when government's passing laws or making new policy. And broadly, we try and raise awareness about what's happening for children and young people. Often, I think, in the community, those issues are well and truly lost. There's not a lot of visibility, so part of our job is to try and make sure that the issues for children and young people get some visibility.
Okay, cool. And is the Commission part of the government?
So the Commission is independent of government. It's really important if you think about the oversight role that I just described, because if we're going to review what government's doing and what government's providing for children and young people and make recommendations and hold government to account when they're not doing as well as they might, it's really important for us to be independent of government. So we're established by government, we have legislation that sets us up, but we're very much independent of government in the way we run.
Okay. So for any young people that might be listening to this, when you say you're independent of the government, that means you're not part of the government at all. So you watch over what the government does. I guess you assess what they're doing and if it's done right, and then you give them recommendations. So technically, the government kind of listens to you guys. Is that kind of right?
That's the theory. No, that's absolutely
Cool.
right. So we sit separate from government, give them advice, look at what government and other services are doing, and ultimately try and get improvements.
Cool. Sounds like a pretty cool job.
It is a good job.
So you've got an upcoming inquiry coming in. So what is an inquiry, and what's the inquiry that's about to be rolled out by the Commission?
So an inquiry it's basically a review. It's where we go into an area and we look at what's happening for children and young people. We look at how well a system's working or how well policies are working and what impact they're having on children and young people. And the point, of course, is so if things aren't working well, then the idea of an inquiry is that we can make recommendations for improvements. So we're about to start a really significant inquiry into the experiences of children and young people in out-of-home care. It's going to be an incredibly important piece of work for us.
Has it ever been done before?
Certainly not in the way that we're about to do it.
Cool. Okay.
So, at the Commission, we know that the number of children and young people going into out-of-home care is rising really quickly. So over 10,000 children and young people in Victoria are in out-of-home care at the moment. If you think about how significant it is to be removed from your parent, if you're a child or a young person, and taken into out-of-home care, from our point of view, it's incredibly important that that system and all of the services as part of that system are working really, really well. Now, in my job, I'm really lucky. I get to talk to lots of children and young people in care and some who've just recently left care. And through that and other work that we do here, it's fair to say that I think there's a lot of scope for improvement. Based on what children and young people tell me, I hear some pretty horrendous experiences in out-of-home care. So we at the Commission really wanted to do an inquiry into out-of-home care from the perspective of children and young people and make sure that the views and the experiences of those children and young people are actually part of what's going to inform change. They're actually going to be at the heart of driving some serious reform.
Okay. So you've sort of mentioned quite a few big words that I know I didn't know what they meant not long before I started working with you. I do now. But words like policies and legislation and, we're talking about government, we're talking about this huge inquiry. It sounds like a really big job. And I know a lot of young people know how complex the out-of-home care system is. So just to make sure that we've understood correctly, you're not looking particularly at services or systems. What you're really interested in is just hearing from young people what their world is like for them when they're living in out-of-home care.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
The focus of this inquiry is to understand what are the issues from the point of view of children and young people, what's working well, and what's not working well, what needs to be improved, so that children and young people in out-of-home care can feel safe, they can feel supported, and they can feel like they've got a say in what happens to them. That's really what we want to know.
Cool, totally. And I know there's probably a lot of young people right now that are hearing us have this conversation that are getting probably a little bit excited about the fact that somebody's actually wanting to investigate something that we know needs a lot of work. However, I think a lot of young people are a little bit concerned about talking to high up sort of people, you know, DHS, child protection. It can seem a bit intimidating. Will young people be identified if they speak to you, or is this confidential? So will they be able to say whatever they want with no repercussion? How does it work?
Yeah, excellent question, Crystal. Certainly, at the end of this inquiry, we will be making a public report. But it's really important for people to know, for children and young people to know, that our public report, and indeed anything that we submit to government, won't identify individuals, so individual children and young people who've spoken to us. So what we prepare will be all about saying, here's what we heard, here are the issues that we heard about. It won't be about saying what individuals told us that. It's all about here are the themes that came up, and here's what we think, based on what we heard, needs to be done to improve things.
It really does sound like a big job. How long does something like that take to do?
Yeah, it can take a little while, particularly because we know that children and young people will want to spend a bit of time to understand what it is that we're doing. We know that it might take us a bit of time to reach out and be able to find children and young people who want to talk to us, who want to give us their views or put them in through the survey, and so on. So we're going to take a little bit of time over this. At the same time, I'm pretty impatient. I like the idea that this process is going to deliver some real change. So at the moment, we're aiming to finish this so that we have a report tabled in Parliament with some strong recommendations for government and other agencies by May of next year. That's the time that we're working to at the moment.
Okay, so just a bit less than a year.
That's right.
Okay, cool. And so there must be so many young people out there that do want to contribute in whatever way that they can. And because this is the first time that something like this is being done, it really is so important that as many young people as possible can try to say what they need to say, or to, you know, discuss or give their input and reflections about things that have worked or haven't worked for them, so that Liana and the people at the Commission can recommend these things to government so that change can be better for all young people in Victoria. How do we get involved? How do young people get involved and have a say?
So you're absolutely right. We, of course, want to hear from, in whatever way, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, we want to hear from as many children and young people as possible. That's what will make this piece of work valuable. That's what ultimately will drive some change, is if we hear from lots of children and young people. We've got really good information to base our report and our recommendations on. So if you're interested in being involved, there's a couple of things you can do. You can email us. We have an email set up on the Commission for Children and Young People's website. And if you email us that way, you can stay in contact, and we'll make sure that we give you updates about the inquiry. You can also register your interest in being part of consultations. We'll be going around different parts of Melbourne and different parts of Victoria, speaking to children and young people. And if you might be interested in that, you can just send us your email and send us your postcode. And if we're coming to an area near you, then we can let you know. And then finally, we're going to have a survey. We know that not every young person who wants to feed into this will want to come and talk to us. absolutely. So we're going to have a survey that will be available from our website that you can just sit wherever, fill in and feed in your information and your ideas and your thoughts that way. I say again, it's going to be incredibly important for us to hear from children and young people. We will treat that information really, really carefully. We absolutely will make sure that we protect any details that you give us, that we don't disclose identity, etc., etc. But we really want to hear from you because we want to make sure your information is ultimately used to drive some change.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Liana, and we look forward to seeing how the inquiry goes.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen.
No worries.